Hey everyone, David here. It's been a while since I've made any videos or posts, and today I'm finally ready to share what I've been working on these past months. Welcome everyone to the first Arcadian Rift devlog. I'm hoping to release updates like this at the start of every month going forward. This particular devlog is going to be a very long one, as I'll be covering almost everything I've been working on since the beginning of the project. The next devlogs should be all a lot shorter. So let's jump on in. What is Arcadian Rift? What is this game I'm working on? It's a single-player, sci-fi, first-person shooter game. You're basically a pirate, but in space. You raid cargo ships, and you search for loot and valuables that you can sell. This leads to a kind of variety of action, puzzle, and exploration gameplay. I'm developing it solo in Unreal Engine 4, with most of the assets, art, and animation being done in Blender. I thought this would be good for my first game, as first-person games tend to be my favorite. I'm a big fan of things like BioShock Infinite, Half-Life, Borderlands, and Halo. Since my longer-term goal is to create some sort of first-person, multiplayer, story-heavy RPG game, I thought it'd make sense to jump straight into the 3D first-person genre, rather than doing a 2D game or something a little easier. I had previously worked on a team in a 2D game in Unity about 6 years ago. The story behind the game is that there was this empire, the Arcadian Empire, which ruled over a vast sector of space spanning many star systems. After a bunch of tension, turmoil, and an uprising, the empire collapsed, leaving the entire sector of space vulnerable. Instead of new rule rising up, everyone sort of just pulled out and left. Without any security or laws, the entire stretch of space became dangerous and filled only with the few pirates and outlaws who could take the risk, such as the character you play as. Since there are still normal civilizations on either side of this stretch, cargo ships are forced to make the travel through this dangerous dark sector, and thus the area became known as the Arcadian Rift. The overall design and vibe of the game is that you can kind of just be the pirate however you want to be. When you board a ship to start pirating, there is no winning. You can proceed as long as you want on a mission, trying to go for more loot, but potentially increasing risk. The whole game is based around this design where you aren't really following any linear path. As you board the ships, you can explore around and figure out ways to get better loot. You use your pirating gadgets and weapons as you see fit. July 16th was when the game actually began full production. Everything in the months leading up to that point was a lot of brainstorming, different ideas, learning Unreal Engine, making prototypes and kind of test projects. Even to this day, the game continuously changes direction a bit as I iterate. Since this devlog is going to be pretty long already, I decided to cut out all the pre-production and earlier ideas for the game, including the Ice Planet prototype, which I had fairly functional and done a lot of concept and prototype art for. If people are interested, I could always make a separate video covering all these older ideas and original plans. Anyway, on July 16th, I finally started creating Arcadian Rift inside Unreal Engine 4. My very first goal was to get the player movement feeling nice. Personally, I feel player movement is one of the most important and often overlooked parts of the game. You might be doing a lot of shooting, puzzling, platforming, but you're probably going to be spending 99% of the time moving your character. So if the movement doesn't feel good, the entire game experience doesn't feel good. So I created a small test bed with various lengths, heights, and stairs to kind of get a feel for the player's speed, friction, jump heights, jump distances, and crouching. After quickly getting this going, my next priority was on the overall first-person experience, which mostly meant getting the player's arms and items working. I had an artist, Flair, help with some concept art at these early stages. I then spent a while modeling these arms, which would be on screen so much that I wanted to make sure they got a little more time and detail put into them. And then I worked with Sophie Cat to help get the arms rigged. Next step was to start making these arms work with various weapons and items, so I went about modeling a few of the basic weapons, many designed by Flair, others which were kind of mashups of her designs, which I kind of put together in paint. and a scanner, which was my own design, and then moved on to animation. The first animations were regarding reactions to player movements, such as walking. After testing and doing some research, what I found worked well was creating a default walk animation, then creating 4 variations of the walk, each in a different direction. This meant that as the player walks in different directions, the items they were holding would also kind of move accordingly, giving a nice fluid feel of feedback based on the player's actions. Such as when they start walking forward, you'll see the gun kind of move back in their hand a little bit, and as they kind of walk to the left, it kind of leans into it. Also, I added some offset animation as the player looks around. This helps the weapons not feel glued onto the screen, and also gives that same feedback feeling. I then started going down the remaining animations for each weapon. This included things like sprinting, deploying weapons, each of which has a unique deploy, reloading, which was most fun of the animations, firing, and even animations for when the player jumps and lands. All in all, it was quite a lot of animations per weapon, but surprisingly not too time-consuming and definitely worth it. Each weapon does have a kind of sense of character and personality based on the animations that are kind of unique to them. I strung all these together in Unreal using a lot of blend spaces and anim graph stuff, and got 3 weapons, the Q cannon and the scanner, all animated and implemented in the game. Speaking of the Q cannon, since you're going to be exploring around ships and messing with their stuff, I figured that the player would need something to manipulate the environment a bit, to pick things up, pull them aside, etc. Initially, I had a lot of unique mechanics to this gadget, such as being able to freeze objects midair, but I was honestly running out of keybinds, and I liked the simplicity of just 2 mouse buttons, left click, right click. So currently it actually behaves very similar to the gravity gun. I am considering going back to some of my original ideas with this gadget later to keep it a little more unique. I'll obviously update you if things change in the future. As this was all happening, I was simultaneously working on modeling the player's ship, the Astral Phoenix. Things began as some loose paper sketches, then some rough, shape blockouts in Blender. I used these 3D spaces to get a feel for the layout, the kind of compositional framing, and then I could kind of bring it into Unreal Engine, even in this early state, walk around it, and kind of feel how long it took to walk through the ship, how much headspace you had. The design I ultimately went for was to have the ship mostly centered around the holotable, which is where you'll be scanning for ships to board, and then around this atrium are various rooms you'll be using a lot, such as the armory. I thought having all these stations nearby would be a lot easier on the player, so they aren't running all the way across the ship as they're trying to start a new mission. You can see that I left it pretty open. There's only a few pillars you can easily walk around, so you can get to where you're going pretty quick. Modeling continued for about a week until I came up with something I was fairly happy with and was able to use in early prototypes of the game. It wasn't until a few weeks ago from today that I returned to modeling the ship, detailing it more, finishing the cargo room where the player will be able to visibly see their loot being stored, adding the entire cockpit, the navigation section, the escape pods. There are still a few empty rooms in the ship that I'll be working on later, but for now aren't needed to test the game. I also finished up the boarding pod, both the interior and the exterior, which also received some extra love as the player will be using this pod a lot to get to and from missions. As a sneak peek, I also have a very rough early blockout of the ship exterior, but as it's not seen from the outside much, I probably won't return to it for a while. Once I had the basic ship figured out and brought it into Unreal, I started working on the holotable. Here I have a very, very basic and ugly holotable working that allows the player to select a ship to board, and then upon entering the boarding pod and launching off, they will load up that specific ship. Getting the levels loading and switching properly was core to making the game work early on. The holotable itself still needs to be done. My goal is to allow the player to actually perform the scanning, so it feels a little more immersive, like a little mini-game kind of thing where you'll get to move some little scanning device around and actually kind of look for the ships, then you can detect them and feel like you actually found those ships and then you board them. One thing you'll notice with this game is how everything is designed to make the player feel very much like they're actually interacting with stuff on the ship. I almost never pull up any 2D UI in front of them. During all this, I did a few prototypes at one point for some weapon VFX. I decided to use the newer of the two Unreal Engine particle systems, Niagara, which at this time wasn't fully released and didn't have many tutorials. Actually, still doesn't have many tutorials, but I got this basic effect working in a prototype scene. This is also where I designed a basic bullet hole effect, which kind of fits with the energy weapon designs, and really helps make the weapons feel a lot more powerful when you see these bright holes being left behind and they kind of fade out. I spent a while with different designs for the cargo ships. My ultimate goal here is to make a variety of different cargo ships to raid, but still have it manageable for me to design, since I'm the only dev on this project, and making a whole bunch of cargo ships and artwork and stuff can take a long time. So I decided to go for somewhat kind of modular kit bash kind of approach, similar to Forge mode from the Halo games. I created a lot of individual floor pieces, walls, and decorative pieces, and I could assemble them in any arrangement. I'd then fill the large cargo holds with a variety of immovable containers, and thus I could reuse the same modular ships with a variety of kind of modular container arrangements to get even more mileage out of each ship. There were a lot of rejected ship ideas that I toiled with for a long time, many of them a result of older game design which has since been dropped. I'm going to skip over a lot of the cargo stuff, as the cargo was also originally made for the older designs I just mentioned. At first I had the player actually using the Q cannon to grab the actual cargo containers and bring them back to their ship. I modeled a bunch of different crate types for this, but then realized that it just wasn't going to be fun running to and from your pod with every single crate. I had ideas like hoops that you could throw the crates through and it would teleport back to your pod. I had an idea for like your companion that would float around and you'd like catch the crates and hold on to them. But it always seemed like it either didn't make much sense in the lore, wasn't much fun, or was just technically too challenging. Eventually I just had it so you can just open crates and grab the actual loot inside. This was kind of nice because it meant instead of just grabbing like a few crates, you could just run around the ship looting all kinds of things. I made some placeholder loot items which will eventually, be actual things like gems, ingots, ammunition, electronics, going with the basic rarity colors that I noticed literally every game uses. I added some awesome rays and glows that kind of shine from the items, made out of 2D planes. These give more satisfaction when you get nice loot. I ended up toning down some of the kind of indicators that felt a little more gamey, and instead focused on more of the glow and the rays to still indicate the rarity without making it feel a little too artificial. I did a few early enemy tests, such as turrets, some of which didn't fire quite the way I wanted. Then the turrets got scrapped for now, but I did make a cool laser entity which dynamically adjusts based on collisions, and then I also created a small turret that kind of pops out of the ground, fires multiple lasers, and spins around as a type of hazard or defense system. The HUD is still fairly temporary, but functionality, I have everything working for things like displaying health and money and stuff. But I did add some real basic UI and a few animations to show things like your equipped weapons as you switch through weapons. Also using some more UI animations as I started to become a little more comfortable. I even got a little bit spicy and made a bit fancier when you pick up loot, showing the value of the new loot you got. The text kind of slides up and adds itself to the overall value you're carrying with a nice little kind of bounce effect. I also did some basic designs for different crosshairs for the different weapons. I definitely want to make sure each weapon has a unique crosshair to help the player kind of get a feel for what they're firing. Around this point, I decided to focus primarily on the MVP, or minimum viable product, for the game. I had been using ClickUp to organize some of my tasks and thoughts. Previously, I had just been working, in a priority that made sense to me. I found that as soon as I did this, my overall productivity increased a lot. I got all these little things working that you might overlook or not think about at first, but are essential to the game. Pressing tab now opens a menu that shows you the status of your missions. Pressing escape opens the actual in-game menu. Upon finishing a mission, you're given a screen that shows your overall result of the mission. I made it so that the loot you take gets stored on the crates on your ship, as well as gets displayed on your panel. You can then sell the loot at a shop and get the money for it, and you can then use the money to shop for new weapons to buy, which will then appear in your armory. And this completed the main game loop of missions, money, buying stuff, harder missions, repeat. I also implemented the save game ability, which is obviously essential. You can save your game into various slots, preview how much money you had in that save slot before loading it, and delete game slots after confirmation. I'm hoping to eventually use the UE4 clock functionality to show when each slot was last saved. It's worth noting that, as an MVP, much of what you're seeing are obviously just placeholder assets visually. The goal is to get the functionality and gameplay down and working, and if it works and plays well, I can easily add the art later. For example, the space station doesn't need to look pretty for me to test how fun the game is, so right now it's literally just a bunch of big cubes that kind of resemble buildings. I also implemented the player's death, where the player loses control of movement and has an animation of falling down and dying and then respawning. An interesting note on the death: one of my philosophies with game design is to never take control away from the player unless absolutely necessary. I hate in games when you perform an action and then you just kind of sit there and watch it play out. Sometimes the actions are so long that you can get up and go make a sandwich and kind of come back afterwards. So in this case, rather than dying and immediately losing control and having to watch the animation play out, and I have it such that you can continue looking around, but your ability to look around slowly decreases until eventually you just can't look around anymore and then you die. This helps keep with my philosophy, as well as makes the death seem a little less like, boom, you're dead, here's a cinematic. Instead, it's more like a gradual, oh, you're dying, and you're trying to fight it before it finally, you collapse and fades to black. Next up was a huge task: enemies. Many of the stuff in this project I had a bit of prior experience, such as modeling in Blender or animating. When creating artificial intelligence and behaviors, I was completely lost. I spent a long time, day after day, just literally watching tutorials all day, making prototypes for AIs. Often when working on this game, I would create a separate project in order to prototype individual mechanics, learn the processes, and then once I'm comfortable, do it for real in the main project. And thus the owl enemies were born, my AI testing pawns. After I was fairly comfortable with them, Flair had concepted up some different enemy designs. I did some work with a tank before realizing it was probably not the best starting enemy, and then went for this kind of standard hovering drone. Eventually, I got something working where it idles around, detects the player, aims its turret, searches for the player if they lose sight of the player, and even has a little strafe mechanic to make it a bit more challenge when it gets close. Even added a secondary passive strafe mechanic as the enemy approaches the player, causing them to randomly and smoothly kind of zig to the sides. Otherwise they come straight towards the player and painfully easy. Related to the enemies, I set up a basic system that will allow me to spawn events. This was important so I didn't have enemies just constantly spawning or never spawning. Instead, I can trigger or put on a timer events that can happen, such as a lot of enemies spawning all at once, or reinforcements, or all the lasers turning on. To go along with this, I designed a small piece in the ground that opens a door, raises up, and brings a new enemy into the fight. These kind of things are going to be essential to have enough enemies to fight in a relatively limited playing space. One of the last steps for my MVP was health and ammo, which for now is just a unique type of loot that may drop when destroying enemies, although eventually I'll have health and ammo crates that guarantee a spawn for each. There's also a small shield you can unlock, which I'll get to later, which adds a small amount of damage you can absorb before eating into your health. I've also made a red damage effect for the screen when you get hit, as well as a slightly modified version for when the damage is blocked entirely by your shield, which is fittingly blue. At this point, the game was fully playable. You could load up the game, make a save file, do missions, earn money, and buy stuff. It's just very barren, missing all the story, lots of features, and most of the art. I decided to have a focus on the actual looting aspect of the game for a while, as that'd be the main task you'd be doing on each ship. So I brainstormed all these different loot ideas and then kind of prioritized them. I added support for crates that can contain multiple pieces of loot instead of just one. I made some sort of salvage bucket that you can knock over and the scrap kind of metal pours out, which, although being low value loot, can come in high quantities. I also went back and added scrap metal as a guaranteed drop for killing enemies, so you at least make a little something for destroying them, despite that not being the goal of the game. I have a trapped chest that explodes in your face. I also made a big salvage grinder. You can throw items into the grinder and they get turned into scrap metal below. The idea of this is that you may board a salvage ship, which doesn't have much loot immediately available, but you can pick up large, useless bits of scrap and then grind them down into stuff that you can pick up. I also made a puzzle crate that you have to unlock by powering up in front of an unlocking laser. At first this seems fairly simple, but you start finding versions that require 2 simultaneous beams to power up, or even 4. Using some redirectors, you have to kind of puzzle out how to get all the beams on the crate at once. There's even a nice loot fountain effect I had wanted when you solve the crates that take this additional time. And my favorite loot crate of all, the loot bot. I thought it'd be fun to have a more dynamic experience with some of the loot. This crate transforms into a cute little bunny robot when you get near and hops off to hide. The model was an absolute pain though, as it had to work for both a crate and a robot. There are versions of this crate that just open normally and make the loot bot more of a surprise. Once again, I had Sophie help on the rig with this bad boy, and then I had to animate all the various expanding, contracting, and kind of hopping animations. The eyes actually look towards the player, although I doubt anyone will notice this. The real trick was, once again, the AI, which needed to have the environmental query system, or EQS, to find hiding spots. I spent some time adding additional logic beyond what I was finding in tutorials to make him search for what I think is some reasonable hiding spots relative to the player's location and where they're looking. Not too long ago, I added 2 more ways to spend money, since I was feeling that the game loop kind of needed a lot more to spend money on, otherwise there wasn't really much need to get money in the first place. The first of these was character upgrades. I thought that would be a nice thing to allow players to somewhat level up their character without it feeling too gamey. Keeping with the design I've been going for, the upgrades in the game won't just be skills you unlock in a menu, but instead will go into a shop and see the armor upgrades physically on the shelves. The second thing I added was decorations. I didn't set up the buying process just yet, but you can pick up decorations on your ship, place them wherever you want. I thought this was kind of essential in letting players customize the ship to their liking and have a bit of fun outside the combat. Earlier in the project, I realized I was going to need a unique skybox, or space box if you will. I didn't want to use anything existing, so I went to building one from scratch. I was already pretty proficient with materials in Blender, so I tried making a nice and dynamic material, like in 2D, for a while. It kept looking fake and artificial, and eventually I decided to change the process, change the outcome. Instead of doing a 2D spacescape, I decided to do a 3D spacescape. Using Blender 2.8's Eevee renderer, I started creating a volumetric cloud environment using noise textures, then placing different colored lights inside them and stars. Suddenly, I was shocked at how similar the colors were to real space photos taken from NASA. The gas clouds had all the right kind of color gradients and blends, and I was able to move around and look around to set up a nice view. Using a panoramic exporter, I brought the image in and used it as my custom space texture, and it looked fantastic. Except it didn't, because I didn't actually like it. I temporary lighting. Once again, I watched some tutorials, played around a bit, and started trying to see what I could push and still keep a good frame rate. Luckily, thanks to Blender's Eevee, I was able to do lighting experiments in Blender as I was modeling the ship. This really helped because as I was modeling, I could test what the lighting might look like, where the shadows would be, and I could make adjustments of the model at that time. This meant that when it came time to light it in Unreal, I already had a lot of actual lighting reference ready to go. I knew I wanted a very dim lit environment to help make the kind of VFX and sci-fi glowing elements pop a bit more, and I was hoping to push the volumetric effects as well. Unfortunately, having the volumetric sky thing made just the space outside just kind of ruined. I solved this by creating contained volumetric zones using particle systems. This also gave the nice effect of the volume slightly moving and helping the environment feel more alive. Currently, the frame rate has dropped a bit from the particle-based approach to the volumetrics, but as the lighting is all entirely new to me, I hope to continuously kind of learn more about the lighting, push both the quality and performance before release. We're now getting pretty caught up to the present. My main goal for the next month is going to be focusing on the player experience of a mission. I'll be focusing on like a single cargo ship, adding new assets, creating a solid and final design for one, then filling with things to do, places to explore, puzzles to solve. I'm also contemplating adding a few new enemies and weapons to kind of vary up the gameplay. I guess we'll see next month. So that brings us to the end of my first devlog. Thank you so much for anyone who watched to this point. I promise the next ones will be much shorter now that we're caught up. This definitely wasn't everything I worked on. There's tons of blueprint code and systems I didn't even go over, lots of prototypes that were made to test specific features, and even lots of ideas and concepts, and even assets that were made and then later removed. Like I mentioned before, I had a huge slew of stuff for this game that started earlier in the project and gradually got scrapped as the design shifted. Also, I should mention, I used to do many tutorials for different software I've used in the past. Now that you're seeing me use Unreal Engine, Blender, do all these kind of cool technical stuff, let me know if you're interested in any tutorials for anything you're seeing me doing. If there's enough requests for how I'm doing some of these things specifically, I'll definitely consider putting a tutorial together. Finally, I do want to mention I do have a Patreon up for those who want to support my work. At the moment, I only have a $1 and $5 level, as there's not much I can offer as rewards, and the game is still a ways off. I am definitely interested to hear if anyone has any ideas for other rewards. Once the game is closer, I'm sure I'll have a reward to get your name in the game, and near release I'll probably have one where you can be a beta tester or something fun like that. I'll have that linked below. I also have a Discord which could tie into the Patreon rewards eventually, but right now I'm keeping my Discord a little more private. I'm not quite at the point where I want to start opening that up, just because the game's still pretty far away. But let me know if you are interested in joining the Discord. If there's enough interest in that, maybe I could open that up a little earlier. So let me know. That's all for now. Thanks again for watching. Please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the game, or answer any questions about what I'm working on. And I'll see you again next month.